Okay, so Prigozhin has released his first statement since he did a big funny and led a coup, a mutiny against the Russian government, taking over Rostov, a city the size of Dallas, Texas, the head of the Southern Military Command, which manages the war in Ukraine, in Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, as well as the local region, is a major logistical hub for the war in Ukraine through Donetsk and Luhansk, and then marched on Moscow. The entire way, he was screaming about how the war has been mismanaged, how thousands are dying every day, how the Ukrainians might take back Crimea, how the Russians could lose the war, how this is all so disgraceful and they spit on the graves of the dead, all in a desperate ploy to get to Gerasimov and Shoigu, who were trying to corner Prigozhin with these new MOD contracts that would allow them to centralize more control around the Russian Ministry of Defense and have more authority over Wagner, which could maybe lead to its disillusionment and possibly Prigozhin getting the window treatment, as in being killed. So he pulls the big funny, and he gets much further than anyone could have expected, within like 125 miles of Moscow, before entering negotiations with Putin to turn around. Now, the details of those negotiations and what has been agreed to is still a little blurry, right? We know at the time, the Russian government said that they would let Prigozhin off, and they would let everybody who participated off. And it seems, because of Putin's speech, that they are going to let everybody who participated off. But they're also saying that they're going to bring the people who organized this to justice, which of course is a direction to Prigozhin, even if Putin won't say Prigozhin's name, almost like he's scared of him. We don't know if he's actually going to go through with that, or if it's just tough language in order to make it look like, hey, you can't just challenge my authority and get away with it. He's totally going to be punished. Because until he's in prison or he's dead, like, Prigozhin's still operating in Belarus. And from what he says here, and from what little information we do have from other outlets saying that Wagner bases are being built in Belarus, it very much looks like that Wagner might actually survive under Yevgeny Prigozhin's leadership in Belarus, which would be insane and a massive rejection of Putin's quote-unquote crackdown. And it seems from Putin's speech that is the case. And Prigozhin is going to back that up in this speech, but, you know, it's 11 minutes. Let's go through it. I just wanted to give some background for what's going on. This is the first speech that he's made. It is presumably from inside of Belarus, but we still haven't seen photos and pictures of him in there. So that's still an assumption based on media reports. Now let's listen to what he has to say. I'm going to be translating what he is saying. Now, this is not a video. This has been edited in afterwards to make it look like the still picture of Prigozhin is talking, because you're going to see his mouth moving. I don't know why this Twitter account decided to do it. I think it's kind of funny, but I am going to be reading the subtitles of what he's saying. This is his first statement since he did a sonic run towards the capital and lived to tell the tale, which nobody thought he would. Today, I opened up the press service account and had thousands of questions about the events that took place. In order to avoid misunderstanding, I want to answer the main questions. First off, what was the basis for the March of Justice on June 23rd? So he's not calling it a mutiny, he's calling it a March of Justice. Just so you understand why he's calling it that, because mutiny doesn't sound very nice, does it? By the way, most like marches and protests don't involve shooting down airplanes. So for those of you, because I have seen some people in the pro-Russia sphere try to paint like, oh, this was all just a protest. Again, you usually don't shoot down your own country's planes during just like a peaceful protest. PMC Wagner is the most experienced and combat-ready unit in Russia and possibly the world. Motivated, locked and loaded fighters who have fulfilled a huge number of tasks in the interests of the Russian Federation, and always only in the interests of the Russian Federation, in Africa, in Arab countries, and all over the world. Thank you, Maniac, so much for the tier 1 sub in Gutter Chat, or the primer in Gutter Chat. I appreciate it. Russia is weak. Trying to save Russia from collapse only prolongs the war. Man, it's oopsie daisy how the tables have turned. The unit recently achieved solid results in Ukraine, having completed the most difficult tasks imaginable. Why does his face look like AI? Because I already explained this, but I'm not going to say it again. This is not a real video of Prigozhin. The audio is real. Somebody edited to make this picture, make his face move. That's it. They didn't have anything visually entertaining, so they just made this. The unit recently achieved solid results in Ukraine. Oh, 1 second. I didn't read all of that. It completed the most difficult task imaginable. Okay, I did read that. As a result of schemes and half-baked decisions, this unit was supposed to cease its existence on July 1st, 2023. The Commanders' Council got together, they brought all the information to the men, and nobody agreed to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. Because everyone knows perfectly well, from the current situation and their experience during the special military operation, that this will lead to a complete loss of combat effectiveness. Experienced fighters, experienced commanders will be dragged out, and they'll basically be sent to the meat grinder. So, the first thing I want to say that is crazy about this speech is, first off, he is saying at the start of this that they did this to avoid Wagner being destroyed. That is the intention he's putting forward, which I believe that at least was one of the intentions of this. Maybe Wagner wanted more. We would have to listen to those internal negotiations to figure that out, and we're never going to hear that. Maybe 100 years from now in the future, when historians dig up the transcribes from Russian archives or something. But an interesting part of this is Prigozhin is still loud. Prigozhin is still criticizing the government, and Prigozhin is still criticizing the Ministry of Defense. This dude survived one of the craziest situations you could possibly imagine. He did the impossible that nobody think he could pull off. And here he is, still criticizing the Russian MOD, still jostling for power with them, still controlling the narrative about how the Russian MOD is blaming, is the real reason that the war is failing. Where they will not be able to use their combat potential and combat experience. Those fighters who decided that they're willing to go to the Ministry of Defense have all gone. But that number is minimal. We're talking like 2%. Now, this is his number that he's putting forward, that it's 2%. Who knows if it's that small? Maybe it's bigger. Maybe it's small. I doubt it would be smaller. Of course, he wouldn't emphasize that. Maybe it's bigger. Maybe it's not. But either way, a significant portion of Wagner seems to still be with him. We made every argument for saving PMC Wagner and keeping it intact. But they didn't implement a single one. We tried to get into any other structure where we could really be of use. We were strongly against what they wanted to do. At the same time, knowing your attitude about closing PMC Wagner, the decision to move us to the Defense Ministry was made at the most inappropriate moment. Nevertheless, we started getting out all of our equipment, collecting everything necessary, making inventories. And if no decision was made, we were going to go out on June 30th in a convoy to Rostov and publicly hand over the equipment to the Special Military Operation Headquarters. I believe this is the same place that they took over by force, by the way, that he's saying he was going to hand over weapons. I don't know if this was true. From what we have been told by U.S. officials, that they knew in advance that this was coming. So, you know, this was pretty lightning fast. It indicates that this was being planned for a bit. And so maybe there was a scenario where he didn't go through with it, depending on what the signals were on the ground, and he does go through with handing over all these supplies and handing over Wagner to the MOD. But on the other hand, in order to do what he did, he had to plan it for a while. So the idea that, you know, this was all, the plan was always to hand over all the supplies, I take that with a massive grain of salt, because this whole thing had to be planned in advance. When you think about how quickly Wagner moved, I mean, very, very quickly. Within 24 hours, they were 125 miles from Kiev. They were in striking distance. I refuse to believe that was not heavily planned. Despite the fact that we showed no signs of aggression, we were hit with a missile strike. And immediately after that, helicopters opened fire. About 33 people, PMC Wagner warriors, died. Some were injured. Okay, so this is interesting. So for those of you who don't know, this whole confrontation, public military confrontation, this beer hall push, we can call it maybe, this mutiny, this coup, whatever you want to refer to it as. I think mutiny would probably be the most technically accurate word, but everyone's calling it the coup, and all hail the algorithm. This all started because, and this is what he claims, that the Russian Ministry of Defense bombed a Wagner position and killed Wagner personnel. And in the video that he posted, it shows the immediate aftermath of what was supposedly a strike, and it shows one charred and destroyed body that's completely unrecognizable. And like some flames on a bush and like a hole in the ground, which could look like an impact crater. And all of that with one body. Now he's claiming that 33 people were killed. Now, I did not see no 33 bodies in the footage I saw of the impact of that supposed MOD strike. I only saw one charred up body that was unrecognizable. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying that Yevgeny Prigozhin is going to say whatever he can to benefit himself. And there's a decent chance, at the very least, that he's lying about this, and that, number one, he's either exaggerating the death toll, because why wouldn't they show all the bodies if they could? Or number two, the MOD didn't even do this. I don't know what the motivation exactly would be from the MOD. We do know that there's been a lot of discontent in the Russian armed forces. We've had Russian volunteers report on Telegram channels and on other locations. These are like people who go out to trenches and hand out gear, hand out socks, the stuff that the Russian government has failed to provide their own soldiers. And they say that infighting between the different PMCs, between the VDV, the regular armed forces, Wagner, and all these different groups means they don't communicate well, they don't work with each other well, they don't protect each other's flanks as effectively as they could, and it's leading to deaths, and it's undermining the Russian war effort, and that they need unity. That's part of the reason why Vladimir Putin kind of emphasized unity so much in his speech, because, by the way, this is not the end. And even if Prigozhin never does another like beer hall push and never tries something like this again, or if he even dies a week from now, this isn't going to solve all of the divisions within the Russian military. Prigozhin right now is continuing to attack the Russian Ministry of Defense. As Putin is calling for unity, Prigozhin continues to say, screw the MOD. They suck. They are bad. They are a bunch of hoes. They suck. He continues to do that. So, but the main point about the strike is we don't even know for sure that it was the MOD, and I certainly didn't see no 33 bodies. This triggered the immediate decision by the Commander's Council that we must move out immediately. I made a statement in which I said they would not show aggression in any way. But if they're going to hit us with airstrikes, we will take it as an attempt to destroy us and will respond. So this is his justification for the fact that Wagner shot down 7 Russian aircraft, including a command plane and like 6 helicopters, which killed a decent amount of Russian airmen, which a lot of Russians are very honestly pissed about. Putin seems to be cucked on and is not going to be punishing any of the Wagner soldiers that did it. But Prigozhin's justification for this, because it just doesn't look good when you kill Russian soldiers, is look, they fired upon us and we defended ourselves. But of course they fired upon you. You were charging towards the capital in an attempted mutiny against the government. one that you got successful negotiations out of. At least semi-successful, at the very least. At least temporarily, if Putin goes back on it later. Yeah, of course they shot at you. They were given orders to shoot at you. I mean, they were ready for it, and they fired back. They knew that they might be fired upon, and they fired back, and they killed Russian airmen. Doing this type of thing could have resulted in this, and it did, and now they're dead. So he can, like, try to draw up any justification, like, oh, they fired upon us. Of course they fired upon you. You were engaged in an active mutiny against the government. Of course they did. Look, I don't want to, like, challenge Prigozhin's patriotism, but you cannot surprise Pikachu face when you try to mutiny the government, and then the government doesn't respond in the best way to it, and they fire upon you. During the whole march, which lasted 24 hours, one convoy went to Rostov, the other headed for Moscow. In a day, we have covered 780 kilometers. Not a single soldier on the ground was killed. We regret that we had to strike back at air assets. By the way, we don't even know for sure that nobody on the ground was killed. There were, like, reports of fire on the ground and stuff, but as of right now, we don't have any confirmation of that, while we do have footage of Russian aircraft falling out of the sky after being shot down by Wagner. But those assets were dropping bombs and launching rocket attacks. Could you imagine if I, like, stormed into the Capitol and I was gonna try to, like, I don't know, take over more authority for myself and maybe kill some people in the American government? You know, like, let's say Mark Miller or something. And then somebody fires at me and I kill them, like guards. And I'm like, wow, what a regrettable circumstance. Well, of course that happened. You tried to overthrow the government. You tried to mutiny. You tried to use force against the nation that you're supposedly fighting for after they armed you. Of course they fired upon you. In a single day, we covered 780 kilometers, coming 200 kilometers shy of Moscow. About 125 miles for all the Marifats out there. Fellow Marifats. During this time, all military facilities along the way were blocked and neutralized. That seems to generally be accurate. Yeah, I don't think he's really exaggerating much there. A lot of people laid down their arms. A lot of people stepped aside because they didn't want to be sledgehammered. No one was killed, I repeat, among those who were on the ground. And that was our intention on our part. I mean, I understand why he's emphasizing that, because he doesn't want to focus too much on the fact that he killed a bunch of Russian pilots, right? That's not a good thing to focus on when you're the Russian nationalist type, and that's where you're trying to build a support base in. But I couldn't imagine PMC McDonald's shooting down American F-16s and then afterwards being like, okay, but we didn't shoot any American National Guard troops. And everyone be like, oh, okay, well, it is what it is. But again, Putin might let this guy off the hook. As of right now, it looks like the people who shot those planes down will get off the hook. So I guess this pitch is going to work enough for the government, at least. Or it has to work for the government, because the government might not really be in much of a position to choose. Among the PMC Wagner fighters, several people were wounded and 2 joined us were killed. Ministry of Defense soldiers acting of their own free will. None of the PMC Wagner fighters were forced into this march, and everyone knew its ultimate goal. So this is a contradiction to what Putin said. Putin says that these people were misled. Prigozhin says, nope, that's not the case. They were not misled. They all knew what they were doing. The march's goal was to prevent the destruction of PMC Wagner and to bring justice to those persons who, through their unprofessional actions, have made a huge number of mistakes during the special military operation. The public demanded it. All the military personnel who saw us during the march supported us. We came within 200 kilometers of Moscow, having covered 780 kilometers in both directions. Man, he's really proud of that. Keeps repeating it. We stopped at the moment when the first assault detachment, which had approached to within 200 kilometers of Moscow, deployed its artillery, did reconnaissance of the area, and it was obvious that, at that moment, there would be great bloodshed. Therefore, we determined that the demonstration of what we were prepared to do was enough. Damn, a demonstration of what we were prepared to do. You know what's interesting about this? He doesn't show any regret. He doesn't show any remorse. All of Putin's criticisms, all of his tongue lashing that he's given him, he's just like water off of a duck's back. Doesn't care. No remorse. We were simply demonstrating our great power and marching on our nation's capital. There's not a single ounce of regret in anything that he's saying. If anything, he might be going off of a high right now. Like, I can't believe I actually got away with what nobody could do for over 20 years to the Putin regime. But man, he does not sound regretful. And so if somebody was thinking, oh, this is the age of unity and punishment for those involved, for those who commanded this mutiny, they hear Putin make that speech and they go turn over to Prigozhin, and Prigozhin says, yeah, I did it, and I do it again. It was good. It was good I did it. Sucks I killed some of your boys. I guess they were cool and all, but you know, it is what it is. They fired on us. Get capped. That's his message. That's his message. By the way, can I just brag about how much land we took over? Can I just brag about taking over Rostov? Can I just say that all these soldiers, you know, moved out of the way for us? He doesn't seem to be reeling in his rhetoric basically at all. All the problems that created this scenario in the first place still exist, and it's as clear as day. It's as clear as day. All the divisions, all of the infighting, all of the inflamed rhetoric, all of it's still there. There were two important factors in our decision to turn around. The first factor is that we did not want to shed Russian blood. The second factor is that we went to demonstrate our protest. Dude, you guys ever, I've been to a few protests. I remember I protested with healthcare workers and university staff when I was doing some work with 1199 SEIU. I've gone to other protests as well. At none of those protests have I ever taken out a Stinger missile and shot down American military aircraft, and certainly didn't do it 7 times in a row and then got away with it. Just saying, very unique protest. Not to overthrow the country's government. This is true, by the way. I don't think the purpose of this ever was for Prigozhin to overthrow like the Russian government, as in replace Putin. I think the goal was always to garner more power for himself, to protect Wagner, PMC Wagner, from being destroyed or its power being taken away from it and given to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and to challenge his direct political opponents in Shoigu and Gerasimov. I think that was the main purpose of it. It's still a mutiny. It was still a direct challenge to Putin's power, even more so when Putin came out and directly threatened his group, and they still kept going. But I do think he's not lying here when he says the intention was not necessarily to change the government. Now, I do think there was a moment where it was like, oh, could he go further than that? And if he was given the chance, would he do it? I don't know. But I think he looked at the cards that was dealt and he was like, okay, I'm going to take what deal they offer me. Seems good enough for me. Wagner gets to exist in Belarus. I get off scot-free. My boys get off scot-free. I achieved the protection of Wagner, at least to some extent. I'm going to go screw off to Africa. Again, we don't know all the details of the deal, but that seems to be the vague outline we can see forming from a distance if Putin doesn't go back on it. Even if the FSB says they're still investigating, until they arrest Prigozhin, until they actually do something and it isn't just words, then it's just words from the Putin administration. Just like it was just words that they had to respond to Prigozhin, like the MOD putting out a bullet point trying to convince all the Wagner boys to defect. which didn't work. At this time, Lukashenko extended his hand and offered to find a solution for PMC Wagner to continue operating in a legal framework. So the claim is from Wagner, and after hearing Putin's speech about you can go to Belarus, is that they're going to continue operation in Belarus. And if that's the case, that means the organization that almost took Moscow and directly challenged Putin's government is going to continue to exist. That doesn't sound like them being, responsibility being taken. That doesn't sound like, them being brought to heel. That doesn't sound like Putin holding those responsible for this mutiny, like a lot of the hard rhetoric in his speech gave the impression of. If somebody watched Putin's speech and then watched this speech, you would think they live in two alternative worlds. The convoys turned back and headed for our field camps. I want to draw your attention to the fact that our March of Justice revealed a lot of things we've been saying. The most serious security problems throughout the country. We blocked all military units and airfields that were in our path. In 24 hours, we covered a distance that corresponds to the distance from the starting point of the Russian troops on February 24th, 2022 to Kiev, and from the same point to Uzhhorod. I butchered that, but I tried my best. Uzhhorod, okay. Meaning, if the actions of February 24, 2022, during the start of the special operation, a very special operation, had been carried out by units with the training, morale, and composure of PMC Wagner, and readiness to perform tasks like Wagner, then perhaps the special operation would have lasted just days. It's clear that there were other problems too. Dude, oh my God. He is using his march on Moscow to humiliate the military. He is saying, look, we were able to take Rostov, a city of 1.1 million, and then march on Moscow, taking hundreds upon hundreds of kilometers of road. And the only reason we stopped is because we're such good boys, and we just didn't want to kill any more Russians than we already had. And so we turned around, and we went home. But man, the fact that we could do that, doesn't that show how good we are? And compare that to the MOD. They couldn't take Kiev. Maybe if we were the ones managing this whole affair from the start, and this whole war maybe wouldn't be a mess, wouldn't be a disaster, and we would have taken Kiev in a few days, which was the original intention of the Russian government. He's basically saying, if anything, this coup, military push, mutiny has shown how powerful Wagner is, and that they should be managing the war, because if they did, they probably would have won the war already. So he's continuing to double down and continuing to intensify his criticism of the MOD. It feels like he has, dude, again, no remorse, no, you know what, this was a bad idea, I shouldn't have done it, nothing. He doubles down, everything he did was great, he succeeded in his objectives, and this only proves that he was right all along. The MOD sucks. He could have won the war from the start. The MOD has been mismanaging the war. But we showed the level of organization the Russian army ought to have. He says ought there, meaning that it doesn't have it. And on June 23rd to 24th, when we were passing by Russian cities, civilians were greeting us with Russian flags and with PMC Wagner emblems and flags. They were all happy when we were passing by. By the way, can I also say, and I don't know if I brought this up yet, but Wagner recruiting centers are reopening across Russia. Did you guys know that? They already reopened their second Wagner recruiting center in Russia. Were they penalized at all in any serious manner? It's like literally like just a slap on the wrist. It's just like it's a slap on the wrist. I'm sorry, I hadn't mentioned that yet on stream, and I wanted to make sure that we mentioned it at some point. Now on to this point about people were meeting Wagner in the street with Russian flags and Wagner albums. We did see that. We saw some people come out to the street and praise them. Say Wagner rules, Wagner is the bee's knees. We saw some people flying their albums. People brought out food and water and drinks for them, for the Wagner soldiers that were in Rostov. This happened the most in Rostov, with people cheering them on when they left. And when the police came back, the local authorities came back to the city they abandoned, they were booed. They were booed. And we've seen a reaction on Telegram, which shows that there were people supporting during the military push, this beer hall push, this mutiny. People were praising it online. Not majority of Russians. Again, it's Telegram and a specific section of the military blogger, pro-war blogger Telegram, which is not a best representation for all of Russian society, but it does show what a lot of Russian nationalists think. And a lot of people were like, yes, finally, those scumbags in the Russian Ministry of Defense, Shoigu and Gerasimov, and these clowns who have mismanaged the war, they will pay, and they will be replaced by somebody like General Armageddon, Surovikin, the butcher of Syria, the person who managed the Kherson withdrawal. You know? That did exist. But we have no reason to believe that's the majority of Russians. And a lot of those people were out on the street because Wagner told them to be there. We did see video of people being called by Wagner representatives telling them to go out into the streets in Moscow, go out to the streets and support Wagner. But even if that was the case, they got a lot more support on the street and online than I anticipated. I expected it to just all be, oh my God, he's undercutting the war effort. He's screwing us over. I can't believe this. But there were so many unattended to issues, the high casualties numbers being covered up, the mismanagement of equipment, Russian soldiers having to crowdfund for their military gear, people not getting winter uniforms and winter sleeping bags, and tourniquets breaking out in the field, and the horrible assault on Volodar, which got Russian soldiers slaughtered. There was enough criticisms that people were like, yeah, well, it kind of has a point. At least there were enough to be significant to note. It's significant enough to note, is what I'm saying. They were all happy when we were passing by. I know originally he said, and he'll of course exaggerate the amount of support he said. He said that when he crossed the border, that the border guards ran out and hugged his soldiers. Like it's almost like a Trumpism when the way Prigozhin talks. Honestly, if Trump was in Russian politics, he'd probably not be that far off from Prigozhin. Many of them still write words of support, and some are disappointed that we stopped. This is true, by the way. There are those, and I've seen them, who are disappointed that they stopped. Just look at the Telegram response to him pulling back, how many downvotes and clown emojis it's got. Because in the March of Justice, in addition to our struggle for existence, they saw support for the struggle against the bureaucracy and the other misfortunes that we have in our country today. These are the main questions that I can answer in order to prevent any misunderstanding, both on Russian social networks and in the news media and in foreign networks. In sum, we started our march because of injustice. Along the way, We didn't kill a soldier on the ground. Again, that giant asterisk that he keeps having to add. We didn't kill anyone on the ground. We didn't kill anyone on the ground. No one on the ground whatsoever. Could you imagine like some fighter ace shot down like 100 planes? Pff, me? Have I participated in war? Nah, I haven't killed anyone on the ground. Like, it's a pretty big asterisk, man. Could you imagine like a terror group places a bomb in like a civilian airliner, blows it up, and then during peace negotiations they say we never killed a single civilian on the ground? Like, it's just silly. It's silly. In 24 hours, came within 200 kilometers of Moscow. Again, 125 miles. We entered the city of Rostov and took it under our complete control. The civilians were happy to see us. We gave a masterclass in what it should have looked like on February 24th, 2022. We had no goal of overthrowing the existing regime and a legally elected government, which we've said many times now. We turned around in order to prevent the bloodshed of Russian soldiers. Man. So that is Prigozhin's big speech. Main takeaways. Number one, he seems set on setting up Wagner in Belarus, and from Putin's speech, that seems to correspond with Wagner fighters being allowed to go to Belarus with him. We're hearing reports of Wagner bases being set up in Belarus. Why this was done? Well, I mean, we could see the obvious benefit to Prigozhin if he continues to operate his organization and control it outside of these MOD contracts that were going to be forced on him. He basically preserved the independence of his organization. Also, for Lukashenko, and this is more, speculation, and I want to put an emphasis on this as speculation. It might be useful for Lukashenko to have a private mercenary army on his territory when there's so much discontent at home, and also political rivals that are most likely planning for his downfall if it comes, either with Putin or independently of Putin. So, I mean, there might be some benefit there, but that's just speculation. But he was able to save his organization, save his own hide, save the hides of the people who were under him. To the people who participated in this operation, Prigozhin, even if a lot of the supporters online won't think this because they'll think he didn't go far enough, Prigozhin probably seems like, like a little Napoleon. Like he pulled off what should have been impossible. He did it. He not only challenged the Russian government, but he lived to tell the tale. And while the Russian government talks a lot about repercussions for him, until we see those repercussions, in the FSB, it'll talk about investigations, it'll talk about this, it'll talk about that, it'll talk about that. Until Prigozhin is dead or he is in a prison cell, it will not feel like proper repercussion for a mutiny. Period. End of paragraph. And as of right now, he's still alive, he's not in prison, and he seems to continue to follow the same path that he was on before, endlessly lambasting the Russian MOD, and even using this to say, look how effective we were. We exposed the flaws in the defense establishment at home and showed you how a proper offensive is done. If we managed this from the start, we would have taken Kiev. If anything, this is the best possible representation of the fact that the issues that existed before this coup still exist in the fallout of this coup. And if anything, these issues of divisions within the Russian MOD, within the PMCs, within the volunteer groups, within the entirety of the Russian armed forces, within Russian politics, will most likely intensify as people start to make contingency plans and plan possibly for a post-Putin Russia, now that that's even being speculated about. I'm not saying that's going to happen anytime soon, a post-Putin Russia. I'm just saying the contingency plans are being made. The problems that existed before this coup still exist today. The divisions are still within the Russian Ministry of Defense, still within the PMC, still within the Russian Armed Forces. And Wagner seems like it's going to get away with this scot-free. Putin has never looked weaker, and no amount of tough words can make up for his inaction, as the response online to his speech has shown. absolutely baffling that Prigozhin might actually get away with this. But of course, one last disclaimer before we walk away. This is Prigozhin speaking. Take everything he says with a massive grain of salt, and Putin could go back on the agreement tomorrow and start trying to kill him or something. We don't know, because we don't know what was really said behind closed doors. But if he gets away with it, if he continues to operate Wagner independently, there's no uncrossing the Rubicon. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, but the damage will only be more done. The only thing that could make it worse is if Putin now has to remove not Surovikin, but Gerasimov and Shoigu as well. But that has yet to happen, and so far is just speculation. We'll just have to wait and see and wait for more of the fallout, man.